Hi there. So in this video, as you can hear, there's a knock from the gearbox. In my previous video, we removed the gearbox from the car, and in this video, we are going to take the gearbox apart, find out what the problem is, repair it, and put it back together again. So here we have the gearbox on the bench, and the first thing I'm doing here is I'm just taking off the release bearing. So there's a spring in there that holds the release bearing onto the gearbox itself, so just using the screwdriver there to prise that apart. And then we're going to undo all the bolts on the bell housing. So one thing to note, all the bell housing bolts on this gearbox are all the same length. So you haven't got to worry too much about where they come out and where they go back in. They are all exactly the same size. So with the last part removed, we can just pop the bell housing off the gearbox. You can see there I'm using a screwdriver just to pry it apart. Because of the gasket that's used, the sealant that holds the bell housing in place, that can be quite difficult to get off, and you can use a screwdriver or a mallet to try and tap them off. And once I've got the bell housing off, you can see where my finger is there on the magnet in the gearbox. You can see there's the actual problem. One of the teeth, or two of the teeth, have come off of one of the gears. And as you can see here, I'm just taking the diff out of the gearbox, and then I'm going to take the internals out and see if I can find out what gear has actually broken. That's just a close-up of the actual teeth that have broken off of the gearbox. So before I strip the internals out, we need to take the gear selector off. So there's just two bolts there that hold that on, and we'll have to take out the reverse light switch as well. So again, there's some sealant holding this in place, so with a few taps of the mallet. And also a bit of prying with the screwdriver, we can release the gear selector from the sealant. And that just pulls out of the side of the gearbox once it's come loose. So the gear I've just taken off there is the reverse gear. As you can see, the teeth on the reverse gear are okay. The little bearing that popped out there are the needle roller bearings that sit inside, and there is a washer on top of the gear and below the gear. So the rest of the gearbox this is one of the most simple gearboxes you'll ever see. It all pulls out in one go. I've just pulled out one shaft there to check the teeth, but the whole lot can actually come out in one lump. And as you can see, all of the bearings and the teeth on those gears are okay. So now I'll pull out the rest of the selectors and the output shaft. And as we look more closely on the output shaft, we can see there that there's two teeth have actually sheared off. That's the reverse gear and fifth gear syncro, and we're going to need to replace the syncro on that shaft. So this video was taken a couple of weeks later once the parts had actually arrived. You can see there again where the teeth have sheared off of the syncro. For repair economy, cost of repair economy, to actually replace the entire gear and the syncro, you would have to strip that entire shaft down, take all the bearings off, replace all the clips and shims and stuff like that. So on this, what I'm actually doing, I'm only replacing the syncro where the teeth have actually sheared off. So I've got the new, you can see I've got the new syncro there, but I'm going to separate the syncro off of it and then just slide it onto the old shaft. The three, we can call them shims that you can see just to the left of the shaft there, they are what actually hold the syncro in place. They sit on the shaft in 3 places equal distance apart. They sit on top of some springs, and the tension from the springs pushing those out are what actually hold the syncro in place.
Was that one with the fault code the other day? Does it actually need? Have they just read the code last? Done the guide.
So you can see there I've put the 3 shims in place, and then I'm just going to slide the syncro down on top and then just apply a little bit of pressure to each of those springs or shims in turn, just to slide it down. It will only go on in one way, so you can't get this bit wrong. And that is basically, that's the repair done there. We've got the new syncro on the shaft. So what I'm showing here is the gear selectors and how they go together. It's made up of the 3 plates that sit on the shaft, and they just sit one behind the other. So it's quite a simple setup. And then they just sit on top and slide into the synchros, and you can see there where each one of them sits. And then when we drop it into the box, we're going to lift it up as one unit and drop all 3 of those sections in at the same time. So we lift it up in one piece, and then we drop it down into the box all in one go. There's not the clearance to put the gear selectors on afterwards, so you have to do this part all at the same time. And then you just jiggle it slightly, and the bearings will sit into the casings at the bottom. So that's the first washer for the reverse gear. And as we look at the reverse gear there, if you look at the teeth, they're chamfered on one side, and that's so it's easier for the synchro to slide up over it and actually engage the gear. So you have to make sure you get that gear around the right way, and the chamfer goes down to the bottom as we're looking at the box there. And all I'm trying to do there, I'm just trying to slide the gear over the needle roller bearings that we saw fall out earlier when I removed it. And then we're just going to put the washer on top. And then, having cleaned the magnet off, just popping the magnet back in the box and putting the diff back in as well. And that's really it. That's really rebuilding the gearbox. There's not a lot more to it. It's such a simple box. So all I'm going to do now is, I've already cleaned the gearbox casing of any old oil and made sure it's free. And then we're just going to apply the sealant all the way around. So there we have that. That's nice and even all the way around the box. There's probably slightly too much sealant on there. And with the top of the casing back on, all we're going to do now is we're going to pop all the bolts back in, do the bolts up, and then we're going to reseal where the gear selector goes into the gearbox. So again, we're just going to apply a thin bead of sealant and smear it round, making sure it's nice and flat and even. And the gear selector should just slot straight in. We tighten up the 2 bolts holding it in place. And then last of all, we screw the reverse switch back in. And then we won't fill the gearbox up with oil until it's back in the vehicle. And that's it, we're done.